part 2 of the webinar series. And so we're very excited to have you here. We will be having our wonderful speaker again joining us, Angela. And give me 1 second, I'm sorry. All these. Okay. As a kind of recap, I am going to be introducing Alonzo again, who will tell you more about the order if you're not familiar with it, or if you are joining us later on for the recording. So Alonzo is the chair of the Federal Association Auxiliary Committee. So Alonzo, please give us a little introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Ria. Well, I really want to welcome all on behalf of the Houston Region Auxiliary. We're very excited you can join us for a second webinar. You know, the Order of Malta is a really neat organization. It has 3 very different things that don't come often in any organization that I know of. One is that it's a lay religious order from the Catholic Church. It's also a sovereign state, meaning that it's an independent subject of international law, allowing it to have its own passports, currency, you know, stamps, etc. And then it's an incredibly large charity. The last number that I remember is around 4 billion a year if you add up all the associations, priories, sub-priories, and other associated arms like Multi-Student International. So it creates a huge impact in our world, and its history really dates back to the 11th century. It was known as the Knights Hospitaller. And then Pope Paschal II basically gave sovereignty to the order that at the time was operating a hospital under the care of the Church of St. John. So since that time, the order has kept its motto, which is Tritur Fidei et Obsequiam Pauperum, which means defense of the faith and taking care of the poor and the sick. And then just a quick, you know, straight out of our rule is the order seeks to glorify God by promoting the sanctification of each member through his or her work with the poor and the sick and witness of the Catholic faith. So that kind of summarizes a little bit of what the order is about. The Houston region is one of 32 different areas that the Federal Association is part of. Now, the Federal Association is one of 3 associations in the United States. So the order has a lot of presence all over the world, especially in the United States. Then this webinar specifically was really started by the auxiliary to really try to answer some pertinent questions around medicine and the Catholic faith, and how do they connect maybe current and potential members to meaningful discussions. So this webinar really tries to bring that discussion here. And then really before kicking it off, I just want to really thank Ria for all her hard work putting these together. I mean, together with her husband, Taylor, and Jess, who lead the auxiliary. So without further ado, I just want to thank you again. And yeah, let's get the second webinar started. You're muted, Ria.
Thank you. So thank you so much for the introduction. So as a reminder, we will begin with our keynote speaker, Angela. Following her talk, we will actually have a Q&A in which we will have a wonderful panelist join us, who I'll introduce later as well. Then we'll have some closing remarks, a few announcements for upcoming events. But before we begin, just some housekeeping tips. You do have a microphone icon at the bottom left. Please make sure that is muted throughout the presentation so that we don't get any distractions from our speaker. You do have a chat icon also. During the Q&A, please drop your questions into the chat box. You can send them directly to me or in the chat as a whole, whatever you prefer, and I will field those to our speaker and our panelists today. So to get us started, Angela is a 4th-year pharmacy student from the University of Kansas School of Pharmacy. She's currently located in Kansas City and will soon be moving to Chapel Hill to start her PGY1 residency training at the University of North Carolina. She is pursuing a career as an academic and ambulatory care pharmacist and has an interest in bioethics since starting her undergraduate coursework. This interest has grown into a passion where she decided to enroll in the National Catholic Bioethics Center Bioethics Certification in 2021. She loves the field of pharmacy and her Catholic faith and is excited to understand the complexities of moral and ethical issues surrounding our healthcare. Through her studies, she hopes to live out her faith and care for patients as best as possible through her work as a pharmacist. Following Angela's presentation, we will also have a wonderful panelist who has agreed to join us today and helped us even shape this series. Julie Fritz is joining us as our panelist. She is the Director of Pro-Life Activities for the Archdiocese of Houston-Galveston and does a lot of work with bioethics and also teaches a wonderful and very informational curriculum that I'm sure she'd be happy to talk about if there are more questions at the end. So Angela, please take it away.
Great, thank you. Could you let me share my presentation? All right, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm so excited to be continuing this series and just love to get the chance to share what I'm passionate about. I've been continuing with the certification, and it's just been such a nice breather between all the things going on with graduating from school and preparing to go into residency. But I just love that I get to still integrate this kind of training and this kind of learning experience in my pharmacy career. So tonight is the second part of the three-part webinar series, and this is to help frame what we're going to talk about in the final session. This session, though, is titled Human Dignity and Married Love. So talking about two very important things. Even as I was kind of reviewing what I had put for this presentation, it just is two huge topics that I wish I could talk about for hours and have discussion about. So trying to shorten it, trying to condense it and touch on things because it is two very important things to talk about before we talk about what we're going to talk about next week. So I am going into academia. So of course, objectives that I want you all to achieve by the end of this session. Hopefully you can glean some reasons and justifications for why human life has inherent dignity and value. Recall some of the components of God's plan for marriage, including the sexual act within marriage, which when I speak of married love, that's what I'm referring to, because married love can mean a lot of things, but that's kind of the term sex within marriage is what I'm referring to, and the ends that it's ordered towards, ordained by God. Understand some of the inherent motives that come when people do contraceptive or abortive practices within marriage specifically, and then understand reasons why the Catholic Church does not condone or support these two practices. So those are kind of where we're headed here tonight. But to first touch on some broad overviews, I feel like these are just some big questions that kind of come up whenever we touch these two topics. I think that the first question that we all have to face when it talks about our own lives is, why are we different? Why are humans different than any other creature on the earth? Why do we have this dignity, this value that no other creature on the earth has? What makes us different from animals, plants, earth, matter? Why are we different and why do we matter? Why does it matter the way that we treat each other? What are our responsibilities towards each other as fellow human beings, but also protecting and respecting every human being, no matter its stage, no matter its capabilities, at every point of its existence. As a society, we have certain protections, and understanding the reasons for that and helping us see why certain populations are protected, have certain rights. It just helps us all bring us back to why every human life has dignity, and we have to question that, I think, as an individual. But of course, there has to be new humans in order for our race to continue. So how does that happen? It is rightly placed within marriage and within the family, and it comes about through sex. So within that act, what are the ends of the sexual act within marriage? What are they ordered towards? Because we know it's not just to bring about, new life, although that is the primary thing that we would think about, again, to continue our race. We have to think about all the things that God has planned for that and trying to understand exactly what goes into that act and how we can best order our actions in accordance with its purpose. And then for us faithful Catholics, trying to be faithful to God's plan and to what he teaches is the truth of our lives and our human nature, we would be taught by our church that contraception and abortion are not practices that are endorsed. And we should respect that and believe that, but we also can ask why and understand the reasoning behind that. So those are big questions that we would face when we approach these two topics. And that's what we're going to try and dive into tonight. And so to do that, we can probably draw on a lot of different resources, but two different resources that I thought would be very pertinent are two encyclicals. And this first one is called Evangelium Vitae. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. But an encyclical is something I had to familiarize myself with. But it's a document, from what I understand, written by the Pope that's distributed to the bishops. And encyclical meaning circular, it's meant to be circulated. It's a message that's meant to be spread around, disseminated by the bishops to the rest of the church. And so this encyclical came in 1995 by Pope John Paul II. And specifically, Evangelium Vitae means the gospel of life. It's a great document, covers a lot of ground. Honestly, it covers a lot of different points that are great, and a lot of things about society and society's service to vulnerable populations, the poor, a lot of the dangers in our culture and society. But what I would try to glean from it for this discussion was the topic of humans' inherent dignity. And so I think most people would probably, most Christians would probably say we have dignity because we're made in God's image and likeness. Genesis tells us that from our origin, let us make man in his image, and other places in the Bible as well. But I think most people would point to that. But I think what maybe gets lost is that the fact that we did not earn our life. God gave us life. He breathed life into the first humans, Adam and Eve. They didn't earn their way to being humans. God gave them that ability and gave them the life to live with him in communion with him. And that has certain connotations with it when you look at it that way, that our life was given, it was not earned. Therefore, we are stewards of our life and not complete owners. Because again, we've been given this, and so we have to tend to this gift in a specific way. But we are different than any other creature on the earth. We have this rational and emotional sense that's like no other creature, and it mimics aspects of God's nature, although we are so far from God and his mind and his abilities and things like that. But he has given us this amazing gift of a free will and self-determination, and truly made us free creatures to choose him and to share life with him. But our life here on earth is not all there is. The document talks about we're called to a fullness of life, which exceeds our life here on earth, because we know we have an eternal destiny. We have a soul that is made to unite with God, and there's a lot of different things. Our bodies will be united eventually. Not trying to go into that, but just that we do have an eternal destiny where we share completely, hopefully, in the very life of God and his divine life. So for us to be fully alive as humans here on earth, we should live out this idea that we will one day share our life with God, and we should partake in the life of God here and now, remembering our heavenly destination. And not only that call, we know that the second person of the Trinity, the Son of God, Jesus Christ, bound himself to our very human nature and became incarnate, allowing us to share in his divine life even more after he sent the Holy Spirit after him to live within us. So God, in the form of Jesus Christ, became incarnate. So we have that he shared our own human nature, and by that very fact makes our human nature sacred. And then also we are able to house the Holy Spirit, which goes into a lot of different things, of course, when we receive grace through the sacraments and baptism. But the fact that we can be vessels for the Holy Spirit, and the fact that we have shared this human nature that Jesus Christ has shared, just another proof that we have a very sacred and a very valuable component to our nature that we should respect. So we have incomparable value, each and every person, for all of these reasons. And we just can't prove our value with what we have here on earth, because we know we have all of these divine things that are not measured the same way that we can measure things on earth. So society will try to measure progress and capacities of humans to denote their worth. But it just is meaningless when we think of how much worth comes from being sons and daughters of God and heirs to the kingdom of heaven. So everything on earth just falls short to what we have in terms of our worth here and worth in heaven and worth in God's eyes. But one of the things that this document so rightly points out is that, our life is a good and we are stewards of it. It's a gift, but it is the primary good that all other goods depend on it. We could not be here tonight talking about this if we did not have life within us. Every good that we receive or that we experience is dependent on the fact that we wake up in the morning and God's given us another day. It's the primary good. All other goods depend on it. It is so important to remember that people cannot have any other goods without the first primary good of the right to life. They talk about the sacred value of human life echoes in our hearts, written by the natural law that comes forth from our consciences. And it's so important to remember that God has a voice, even for those who maybe don't know him explicitly, by his name or by his gospel and things like that. He still speaks in the hearts of every human being, and the value of each human being he will express in that place. And the document goes on to talk about just how many attacks, both the amount and the gravity of threats to human life, especially at its most vulnerable state. A lot of different areas that we could touch on, but it's very sad and something that the document addresses and ways to overcome them. So when it talks about all of those different strains and attacks on human life, I like this point or this paragraph that I wanted to bring out. All of these efforts to try and stifle the voice of the Lord fail. And still in every conscience, God is calling people to this new journey of love, openness, and service to human life. So that gave me hope, realizing that, we know the story, we know the end, God wins, and he will continue to speak to us and to speak to the value of human life, no matter what society threatens, no matter what evil is prevailing. His voice will not be stifled, and he has complete power over the earth and over the outcomes. So we can be confident that we can promote, fight, protect for human life and for all of its value at any stage, at any capacity, no matter what society tells us. And then, we can just start down a different path, a different journey, one where we love human beings, we love to serve them and be open to life, open to the gift of life, remembering that God is the master of life, and that he's entrusted us with our own lives and with the lives of others. And then particularly for parents, it would be new lives that's brought into their families, again, through their marriage. So that kind of leads into the next topic here, the next encyclical, which I wanted to talk about this evening, which is Humanability. And I did touch on this in the last webinar, because this is one of the encyclicals which I just really loved. It was written by Pope Paul VI in coordination with, of course, other priests and bishops, but this was from 1968. It inspired me a lot because I thought it was very compelling, very thought out, but it was also to the point, a lot shorter than Evangelium Vitae, but still great. So it talked about married love and marriage as not this random thing that just happened. There was a plan for it. God created marriage and created sex and had a plan for all of it. And so we can either realize that plan and learn about that plan and cooperate it, or we can make up our own thing. But the point is that there is no randomness to it, that there is a wonderful, loving design by a wonderful, loving God. And yes, we can either seek to know it and seek to cooperate with it, or we can't. They talk about how the love within marriage is very unique and specific, and something that spouses, once they commit themselves to each other for the rest of their lives, they're able to share in this kind of intimate and unique love, which is exclusive between them, and they develop and strengthen their marriage through the marital act, through sex, and through this marriage bond that is strengthened by their sharing and self-giving love. The love is so strong that it's life-giving, and through that act, they are able to receive a new gift of life from God and cooperate in bringing new lives into the world. This is what God has chosen between these two individuals whose love is so strong, whose commitment to each other and to cooperating with God's plan is so true and strong, that God has given them the gift of a new life and has chosen this particular environment for new life to come into being. the strong bond that's created between the husband and wife helps sustain them in raising the challenges that come with raising an offspring. And it helps them to be committed to each other, to do the best that they can to make a good environment for their child, and the children strengthen their love as well, which we'll get into here in a bit. So God has just designed this perfect environment within the right cooperation of individuals where a new life can really flourish and be loved and grow into their own new life. So those are kind of the two purposes. Hopefully we can clarify with what I've discussed, is that there's two ends to the sexual act within marriage. One that brings new life and one that unites the couple, so the procreative and the unitive. I've heard it frequently called bonding and babies, the two purposes of sex within marriage. And there are two purposes that are inseparable. God linked them together. They're inherent in the sexual act, and they cannot be unlinked. And when I say cannot, more I mean like they should not be unlinked, because they both have purposes. Sex is not just for unity, but it goes forward. As I mentioned, love becomes so strong that it's life-giving. I would just think many in our culture now maybe don't even go towards the unitive part of sex. It's more just for the pleasure part, or even for the status, which is so degrading to humans and to people. The fact that it's just thought that sex is sought out for pleasure, or even just as a status, very degrading to what this beautiful sacred thing that God has made, and the plans that He has, and just going towards your own plan. But that's kind of where our culture seems to be headed. But this document points out that that children really are a supreme gift of the sexual act of marriage. Between those two acts, I've heard it said in other talks that really the procreative act, or the procreative part of the sexual act, really is the primary or the ultimate end. Having children within marriage is the height of marriage, and it's something that contributes to the parents' welfare in the highest degree in many ways. So that's kind of what this document goes over. But of course, we have different practices, and people have different beliefs for what they want marriage and sex to be, which leads into the topics of contraception and abortion. And this document does address those. And they state very definitively that any direct interruption of generative processes that have already begun, but above all, direct abortion, even for therapeutic reasons, are absolutely excluded as lawful means of regulating the number of children. So direct would mean that your direct intention is to contracept or abort. It's not something that's indirect or a secondary, which kind of gets into things like double effect, which is, I'm not trying to get into that. I just want to make sure that we understand that's a direct intent, that your direct intent is to contracept or abort. And generative processes, that can be with the man or the woman, stopping either of the reproductive biological processes that come with sex. And there's a lot of different contraceptives for both man and woman. Either of those grounds would count in order to prevent life. And then, of course, once life is there, that would be direct abortion, stopping its growth, presence. Both are absolutely excluded by the church. And they said as lawful means of regulating the number of children. So that would be an end, I guess, of these two means. So we use contraception or abortion for the end of regulating children. Well, the end of regulating children isn't always necessarily a bad end. There could be prudent and just reasons for a couple to space births, or want to regulate the number of children they have for prudent and good reasons. But it doesn't mean, because you have a good end, that you can use immoral means to do so. That's a whole other topic as well. Like I said, a lot of things we could get into, because there is lawful and just means to get to that end. One of those being natural family planning, or NFP, which is a big umbrella, which includes a lot of different ways to do that. And it's not the focus of our discussion, but once I dived into that, I just loved knowing all the different things that God has put into our human nature, our biological nature, which are lawful and just, and He has given us a way to responsibly be parents, and to regulate children and bring about their flourishment by spacing out for various things. But so just to continue a little bit more with Humanability, this slide kind of includes both of the documents, trying to link them together. But the idea behind contraception is that life is not wanted. You're wanting to preserve the sexual act, the unitive parts or pleasure parts, whatever, but you don't want the life part. And that's the kind of root of it. But that's the same mentality behind abortion. Life is not wanted. And some people would think this document points out that supporting contraception would help prevent abortion, but it's the same mentality. So if you really strengthen the contraceptive mentality, when it fails, you already have such a strong inclination that makes you want to say yes to abortion because life is still not wanted. So the document points out, and others have pointed out, that it's not a successful way to produce abortions by promoting contraception. There are fruits of the same tree. Life is not seen as a good. It's seen as something that's unwanted. And again, this inherent part of the sexual act that God has made is not seen as something that man wants to cooperate with or to include in his actions. So when it comes to reasons behind that, a lot of people would see life as a hindrance, as something against their own goals, again, against their own desires. And man kind of believes that he's the master of life and can do whatever he wants with functions in his life, whatever he can make in order to alter his life, he can take life into his own hands. So society and culture has kind of taken that idea and run with it. And there's a lot of research, there's a lot of doctors, there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies that will just keep making more and more ways to effectively suppress and get rid of life and just make it very simple. And even within the my own pharmacy education, I guess what's been shocking to me is just, sitting through several lectures of how many different devices, how many different drugs, how many different ways we can make contraception very effective and just kind of blend into the background. When I'm doing patient interviews for meds and they just mention it like it's nothing that they're on these contraceptives. And I guess with my own background, I'm surprised, but I'm really not, though. When I think about it, it's so blended into our society and into our culture. And we have medicine has just made such effective products to do that. And we can tweak it to where a woman or a man doesn't even notice, and it's just blended into the background. So, but one of the things I think that isn't discussed by people who are recommending these or prescribing these is the fact that many contraceptives also function as abortifacients, particularly the hormonal ones containing estrogen and progesterone, have 3 different mechanisms. And the third mechanism, quote unquote, fail safe if the others don't work, is to prevent a new embryo or a new human life from implanting and from growing. So I don't think that many people who use these understand that, but it is something I wanted to point out. So to kind of summarize where we've gone, all human life has inherent dignity and value. We are made in God's image and likeness, and that's a beautiful truth that we share in his divine life here on earth. God has conferred this dignity on us by his gift. We are so special to God, and we have so much value no matter what our health, our identity, our capacity is. And we should be respected as such. With all of our worth and values, we should be respected for that as human beings. God has a beautiful plan. Everything that he does is for our good. And he has a plan for every aspect of our lives, but especially for marriage and married couples, which helps secure their well-being. And they just need to prayerfully explore the reasons and try to learn God's plan and try to learn the church's recommendations. And they will find the beautiful answer that God has there within. Man can try to separate the 2 acts of sex and the unitive and the procreative and just seek what he wants out of them. But ultimately that will not be for his flourishing. And we should faithfully guard what God has created as Catholics once we understand and learn his plan and recognize what's been written in our human nature and what we're called to respect within our humanity that God has created us for. Contraception and abortion are linked very closely. We cannot support either as faithful Catholics and following God's truth for our lives. We're not called to be tyrants over everyone and force our beliefs, but to truly promote others' good, we have to realize that this severely damages the primary unit of our society, which is the family. We want to preserve the well-being of everyone, but also these married couples and also the children they bring into the world. So the Catholic Church is doing that by, not condoning and rejecting these ideas of contraception and abortion when they do that. And we should support them in those efforts with our own personal witness, but also in speaking about this topic. So this is the same questions that I had earlier, but hopefully after we've kind of run through all these different things, you can kind of think of a couple of answers to these questions, because I do think everyone runs through them at least once in their life, maybe more often. But there's a lot of other resources that you could pull. Things from the Catechism, the Bible are probably best ways to start to try and answer these questions more fully and in whatever context you come across them. And yeah, I just think that reflecting on these a little bit more with the topics that we've discussed would be of good use to many people. So for that, we'll open it up to the question and answer portion.
Thank you so much, Angela, for a wonderful presentation. I know it gets everyone's minds turning. As a reminder, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat box, and I'll be able to ask Angela and Julie. So I do have a couple already, and then we'll let others come in. I did want to mention we will also, this webinar is the one that also has a raffle for a book. So I've taken the names of some of our attendees. And so at the end, I'll do just kind of a random generator and we'll see who wins the book. But to get started with the Q&A, so you did mention this briefly a couple of slides ago. So the difference between preventing, I don't know if preventing is the right word, but preventing life via contraception versus NFP, and that may be, you know, due to like proper parents went to space or, you know, we're called to, what is the word? You know, we're called to be responsible parents, responsible parenthood. So that sometimes can be a question for people just learning this, or for those who are not Catholic, is how does that differ? How does you following NFP to prevent having children any different from taking contraceptives? Aren't you, you know, doing the same thing in the end? You're preventing having children.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that some people would call NFP Catholic birth control. I've heard that several times, which yeah, there's a distinction. So between like contraceptive practices, you're not really allowing God to act. You're saying no. You're putting a hard stop as much as you can. I've heard doctors say, you know, though, that contraceptions are not as effective as everyone thinks. Otherwise, they would, you know, like wouldn't have as many pregnancies still coming from that. So as much as they think they are, or you're trying to with contraceptives, you're not allowing God to act. You're not allowing life in. Versus NFP, you're taking steps to, yes, just to prudently and responsibly regulate births, but you're still allowing God to act when he wants to. It's the difference between, yeah, saying closing the door and saying, you know, nope, God, I'm not going to allow life in. I don't want that right now. I don't want you to have an action or a presence in my life and within my marriage. I want to make the calls versus, okay, God, I'm going to order things and try to do what I can because I think this is what is right. But if you have a plan better than me, or if you have something that you think would be more appropriate in the situation, I realize that I am not the master of everything, and I'm going to allow you to bring new life into the situation if you think it's right. So I would say that's the biggest difference, is closing the door versus like cracking open the door, I guess. And NFP is certainly not another form of contraception, because it always leaves an open avenue for life.
And so I would just add to that as well. You know, I think there's a part in the Catechism where it talks about NFP, that NFP should not be used with a contraceptive mentality. And by that, the church just simply means that a couple marries and, well, you know, we're not supposed to use contraception, but we'll just practice NFP indefinitely with the idea of never having children, even if there's not a prudent reason not to. And sometimes, you know, someone is a carrier of a genetic disease that's fatal, you know, that may be a reason to indefinitely space those births. But so the NFP is not to be used with a contraceptive mentality. So we talk a lot in our bioethics class about what that means, what is a contraceptive mentality and what's not. But really, if you look at, just to piggyback off what Angela said, if you look at some of John Paul II's writings on theology of the body, and he talked about, of course, this unitive and procreative aspect of the sexual act, but he talked about really in the sexual act, the spouses are called to make a full gift of themselves to each other. And that's written into our body, that when we have sex with another person, there is a possibility of creating new life, and there's a possibility of deep unity. And so when we contracept, what we're doing is we're saying, you know, our bodies are created this way, but we don't want that, God. You know, what we want is the pleasure or the unity without the possibility of new life. And so what we're doing there, in the words of John Paul II, is, you know, we are treating our spouse as an object of use rather than making a full gift of ourselves to our spouse. And there's an analogy that I heard, you know, Angela talked a lot about how we are created in the image of God. And, you know, we don't create another human being. We can't, on our own as humans, create another eternal being, but we can cooperate with God in doing that. And so we say in the Creed, the Holy Spirit proceeds from the love of the Father and the Son. And this really beautiful analogy that I've heard is, when the Father and the Son love each other, they don't withhold any part of themselves. They give all of themselves to each other. And, you know, through that comes the third person of the Holy Spirit. When a couple gives all of themselves to each other in marriage, there's the possibility of cooperating in this creation of a third person, which I think is a really beautiful analogy. So I hope that answers your question a little bit, but you can follow up if not.
Yes, I love that. I think that's both a wonderful explanation. So we have another one. I won't dwell too long on my own thoughts and diving in. So I understand the case against contraceptives based on our faith. Do you think there is a secular argument against it as well? So like a secular argument against contraceptives.
So, I mean, certainly a lot of the contraceptives that women in particular use, there's a lot of side effects. There's a lot of just negative health consequences that women can have. You know, one of the things that's so interesting to me, one of the arguments for contraception and for abortion is that women need to be equal in the workplace. And if they don't have access to contraception and abortion, well, they can't be equal in the workplace because they'll have these children. And so one of the things we didn't put in my bio, so I was an attorney for about 10 years before I got into ministry, but I did employment law. And the biggest case of discrimination, it wasn't sexual harassment, it wasn't race, it wasn't religion, it wasn't disability, it was pregnancy discrimination, was what I saw more than any other type of discrimination. And there was this idea out there that, well, if a woman has a child, she's automatically going to be a less capable employee, she's automatically going to be a less reliable employee. And before we even know that, before we even give her a chance, we're not going to give her the promotion, or we're not going to give her, we're not going to allow her to keep her job, or we're going to suggest that she go somewhere else. And so this idea, and this is a hard sell at this point, but I think we need to talk about it more, is this idea that we should be, in our society, in our workplaces, we should be supportive of family. We should be supportive of our employees having full lives outside of our workplaces. And that's true humanity, right? It's not, you know, I am a wage slave for Google or whoever, and it's better for them if I don't have children because I'll be a better employee. Well, what about what's better for me and my family? What about what's better for our society? And so if we start exposing the lie that, well, contraceptives allows women to be equal, and talk about, no, contraception's really taking something very significant and very important away from women and from men and from families. We can start that conversation. That's a longer conversation than we have time to do right now, but just a little touch of something.
I think that's a great question and a great answer too, especially kind of the beginning where you mentioned some of the side effects, like when we're talking about secular arguments. And this is, I think, a great kind of teaser and taste of what Angela will be talking about in the third part. But at least from a medical provider perspective, you know, one of the reasons that we argue against contraceptives is a huge thing being blood clots. And then we also get a lot of patients who come in and say, you know, they have mood swings. And those are just side effects that we kind of learn as a part of our bread and butter for, you know, not just our contraceptives, but all medications, at least from a pharmacy perspective. And so I think that's a kind of a really interesting question as well, and how even you alluded to, just, you know, if you kind of think of it from the patient side of things, what are things that you're going to think of and consider when you start a medication, any medication, let alone a contraceptive? And then I also love that you went into the discrimination against pregnancy. I think probably every woman ever who's ever been pregnant has gotten this in some form or capacity. I know I experienced it at a professional level, which is very kind of jarring to me, since it's like one of the 7 deadly sins of the secular world to discriminate on any of those, you know, grounds, and yet it still happens. So I think that was a great segue into another question we had, which is pregnancy now being seen both kind of on the healthcare side and even within, you know, our own communities on the patient side, being seen as a condition. And when we think of it in healthcare terms, we always think of conditions as something to be treated or fixed, right? Not something that we care for or accept about a person. And I know that at least within pharmacy, I can't speak for medicine or other health professions, we are trying to change that language, but we see that language change a lot with like diabetes. Like we don't call the person a diabetic. We call they have diabetes, right? We are not labeling them as their disease or condition. They simply have something. But Angela, I'm curious, from a student perspective, kind of going into that professional practice, how do you think we can change our mindset or even the vocabulary that we use when talking to not only our patients, but also just people around us, to kind of change the way that people are seeing pregnancy and pregnant women, or, you know, just any disease state in general?
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess I haven't had a lot of OB/GYN kind of like at least rotational experiences and things like that. And we do touch on pregnancy, of course, in our curriculums, but I like when I hear people talk about, I mean, with use of contraception and stuff, you're allowing a lifestyle, not necessarily fixing a disease. It's a lifestyle. It's a medication to help you do a certain lifestyle, which is not healthy. And so, yes, like you said, pregnancy is not a condition. It's a natural, or it's not a medical disorder or a condition that needs to be treated or fixed. It's a natural progression of an act that is healthy and normal within certain contexts. So, and I, you know, at least from like pro-life standpoints and things that you hear, you know, I do like to call pregnant women and their children inside of them instead of like saying fetus or things like that. And I think that gets a little touchy with different people, but that's one of the ways I think I try to push that envelope of let's remember that this is a child, this is a human being. I don't call fetus, I don't call it honestly fetus at all. Just I think that it devalues what we're trying to get at with the child inside of the woman. But no, you're right that we need to remember that it's something that's very good, something we should support women and celebrate it. Every time I hear a patient or anyone say they're pregnant, I'm like, oh, you know, congratulations, I'm so excited. Make it a very exciting thing, because it's true in our culture, it's just not a very exciting thing most of the time, which is sad. So I guess that would be my 2 answers as a student, is referring to pregnant women and the children inside of them, and then also just being very excited with them during this time.
And I would agree with that. I think it's important to, you know, we work a lot through our office with crisis pregnancy centers and through ministries like the Gabriel Project with women that are really struggling in a pregnancy. And so being excited and saying congratulations and kind of changing this narrative. As you were talking, Angela, I was thinking a lot about how in certain political circles, abortion and contraceptive is now referred to as the full range of women's reproductive healthcare services. So if you're taking away, contraception and abortion, well, then you're taking away healthcare. And so how are we defining healthcare? Well, healthcare, a lot of definitions that you look up, it's about treating a pathology. It's about curing something that's wrong with a person. And I always say, especially when I'm talking to younger people, okay, pregnancy is not a pathology. As Angela was just saying, pregnancy is not a problem, but so pregnancy is not a pathology. And sorry, I got something in the chat. Father Luke, you're in trouble because I started reading Father Luke's chat and it kind of distracted me. But this is a normal, natural process, much like, I would say pregnancy is more akin to something like going through the process of puberty or going through the process of, normal human growth that a child goes through to reach adulthood. And it's something that it's a natural process that brings you to something else that is good. So we need to distinguish these two types of healthcare. And generally speaking, we don't give drugs to block puberty, although that's a whole different question with some of our transgender treatments. But generally speaking, we see puberty as a good and natural thing that we let continue. And we need to look at pregnancy the same way.
Yes, thank you both so much. I think we could go on forever with this amazing discussion, especially with two fantastic perspectives, both from a healthcare and a non-healthcare side. They are integrated. Some of our questions also gave an amazing teaser to our third and final part in the series. So we are very, very excited for that. You're going to get to learn a lot more about Catholic teaching on emergency contraceptive, and Angela, as our pharmacy student, is even going to go into the mechanisms of action. So you get to get a little bit of pharmacology class in there, which you're not gonna get that level of amazingness anywhere else, unless you decide to go to pharmacy school for 4 years. But I'm just kidding.